The small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, sits tucked between rolling hills and dense forests, the kind of place where neighbors know each other by first name and front doors stay unlocked until well past midnight. In 1992, it was the kind of town where children rode bicycles until streetlights flickered on, where summer nights stretched endlessly, and where nothing truly terrible ever happened. Until it did. The Hartley family lived on Maple Drive, a quiet residential street lined with oak trees and modest two-story homes built in the 1960s. David Hartley, 42, worked as a manager at the local hardware store. His wife, Patricia, 39, taught third grade at Millbrook Elementary. Their sons, 14-year-old Lucas and 11-year-old Ethan, shared the upstairs bedroom at the end of the hall, a cramped space filled with posters of baseball players, comic books stacked in uneven towers, and bunk beds that creaked whenever either boy shifted in his sleep. On the night of August 14, 1992, Patricia Hartley kissed both boys goodnight at 9:30, as she did every evening. She remembered Lucas reading a magazine by flashlight, something about football statistics. Ethan had already been asleep, his face pressed against his pillow, one arm dangling over the edge of the top bunk. Everything was normal. Everything was safe. When Patricia climbed the stairs the next morning at 7 o'clock to wake the boys for breakfast, she found Lucas sitting upright in the bottom bunk, his face drained of color, his eyes wide and unblinking. Ethan was gone. The top bunk was empty, the sheets pulled back as though someone had simply climbed out. Ethan's sneakers were missing from beside the door. His backpack, usually slung over the desk chair, was gone too. But the bedroom window was closed and locked from the inside. The door had been shut all night, Patricia was certain of it. She was a light sleeper, always had been. She would have heard footsteps on the stairs, would have heard the front door open or close. Lucas could barely speak. "And someone..." When Patricia shook him by the shoulders, demanding to know where his brother was, he just stared at her with that hollow expression and whispered, "He was here. He was right there." David called the police at 7:15. By 8 o'clock, 2 officers from the Millbrook Police Department were standing in the boys' bedroom, taking notes, asking questions that had no answers. By noon, search parties were combing through the woods behind the neighborhood. By evening, the story had spread through town like wildfire. A child had vanished from his own bed, from a locked room without a trace. The investigation moved quickly in those first 48 hours. The police interviewed the family, the neighbors, Lucas's friends, Ethan's classmates. They searched the house from attic to basement, looking for signs of forced entry, hidden passages, anything that might explain how an 11-year-old boy could disappear from a second-floor bedroom. They found nothing. Lucas became the focus almost immediately. He was the last person to see Ethan alive, the only other person in that room. Detectives questioned him for hours, gently at first, then with increasing pressure. "What happened that night? Did you and your brother fight? Did Ethan run away? Where is he, Lucas?" The boy's story never changed. He had fallen asleep around 10 o'clock, maybe a little later. He woke up sometime in the middle of the night, not sure why. The room was dark except for a sliver of moonlight coming through the window. He looked up at the top bunk and saw Ethan's shape under the blanket, motionless, breathing. Lucas rolled over and went back to sleep. When he woke again at dawn, Ethan was gone. Psychologists evaluated Lucas, searching for signs of deception or trauma-induced memory suppression. They found neither. The boy was telling the truth as he understood it. He had no idea where his brother had gone. Theories sprouted like weeds. Maybe Ethan had climbed out the window somehow, relocked it from outside through some clever trick, and run away. But the window was 12 feet above the ground with no tree branches nearby, no ladder, no rope. And why would an 11-year-old boy run away in the middle of the night with no warning, no note, no history of behavioral problems? Maybe someone had taken him. But how? The house had been locked, the alarm system armed. There were no signs of struggle, no fingerprints, no DNA evidence. Nothing. Weeks turned into months. The search parties dwindled. The news cameras moved on to other stories. Patricia Hartley stopped teaching and spent her days driving through neighboring towns, stapling missing person flyers to telephone poles, begging strangers if they had seen her son. David threw himself into his work, coming home later and later each night, unable to face the empty chair at the dinner table. Lucas stopped speaking almost entirely. He returned to school in September but sat in classrooms like a ghost, staring at nothing, answering questions in monosyllables when teachers pressed him. The other kids whispered about him, cruel rumors and wild speculation. Some said he had killed his brother and hidden the body. Others said the Hartley house was cursed, that something evil lived in the walls. Lucas heard all of it and said nothing. By the end of 1992, the case had gone cold. The police had exhausted every lead, followed every tip, investigated every possible scenario. Ethan Hartley had simply vanished, as though he had never existed at all. But someone knew the truth. Someone had to. The answer would remain buried for 33 years. In the decades that followed, the Hartley family fractured slowly, like ice cracking under weight. Patricia and David divorced in 1995, the marriage unable to survive the weight of unanswered questions and unspoken accusations. Patricia moved to Ohio, where she lived alone in a small apartment, still keeping Ethan's room exactly as it had been, still waiting for a phone call that would never come. David stayed in Millbrook, though he sold the house on Maple Drive. He could not bear to sleep another night under that roof. Lucas left Pennsylvania the day he turned 18 and never looked back. He changed his name legally in 2003, became Logan Pierce, built a new identity from nothing. He worked construction jobs across the Midwest, never staying anywhere longer than a year, never forming attachments, never speaking about his past. The few people who got close enough to ask about his childhood received only silence. Millbrook itself tried to forget. The Hartley case became local legend, the kind of story parents told in hushed voices to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. The house on Maple Drive changed hands 3 times, each family staying only a few years before moving away. Neighbors reported strange noises at night, doors opening on their own, cold spots in the upstairs hallway. Whether these stories were true or simply the product of suggestion and fear, no one could say for certain. By 2025, most people in Millbrook had forgotten the details. Ethan Hartley was just a name, a faded photograph in the town library's archives, a cautionary tale about how quickly safety can shatter. Then, in March of 2025, construction workers broke ground on a new development project 3 miles outside Millbrook, a stretch of forest that had been purchased by a real estate company planning to build luxury homes. The crew was clearing trees, excavating foundations, preparing the land. On March 19th, a backhoe operator named Raymond Moss struck something solid 6 feet underground. He assumed it was a boulder or an old foundation and called over his supervisor. When they dug carefully around the obstruction, they found concrete, a smooth rectangular slab roughly 8 feet by 4 feet. Unusual, but not unprecedented. Old storm shelters and root cellars dotted the area, relics from decades past. But when they pried open the concrete, they found something else. A metal box, rusted and sealed, sitting in a hollow space beneath the slab. And inside the box, wrapped in plastic sheeting that had degraded over time, were human remains. Small bones, a child's skeleton, scraps of clothing, rotted but still identifiable, a backpack faded and torn, and a wallet containing a school identification card. Ethan Hartley, age 11. And the discovery sent shockwaves through Millbrook. The case that had haunted the town for 3 decades was suddenly front-page news again. FBI agents arrived within hours, securing the site, coordinating with local police, beginning the painstaking process of excavating and documenting evidence. The medical examiner's report confirmed what everyone already suspected. The remains belonged to Ethan Hartley. The cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Time of death, consistent with August 1992. The boy had been dead for 33 years, buried in a carefully constructed hiding place in the middle of the woods, far from any road or trail. But the report raised more questions than it answered. Who had killed him? How had his body ended up 3 miles from his home? And most chilling of all, who had built that concrete tomb? Forensic analysis of the burial site revealed disturbing details. The concrete slab had been poured professionally, with rebar reinforcement and a level surface. The metal box was a military surplus ammunition container, the kind sold at surplus stores throughout the 1980s and 90s. Whoever had buried Ethan had planned meticulously, had taken time to ensure the body would not be found. Police reopened the investigation with renewed urgency. They re-interviewed everyone connected to the original case, pulling out dusty files, reviewing old testimony, searching for inconsistencies. Patricia Hartley, now 67 and living in Columbus, Ohio, received the call on a Tuesday afternoon. She collapsed when they told her. 33 years of hoping, of clinging to the possibility that her son was alive somewhere, stolen by a stranger but still breathing, still existing in the world. Now that hope was gone, replaced by the cold certainty of death and the unbearable knowledge that someone had murdered her child. David Hartley, 70 years old and living in a retirement community outside Pittsburgh, refused to speak to investigators. He hung up the phone when they called and did not answer the door when they visited. His neighbors said he had become a recluse, that he rarely left his apartment, that he spent his days staring out the window at nothing. Lucas, now Logan Pierce, was harder to find. He had moved 18 times in 33 years, leaving no permanent address, no forwarding information. Investigators tracked him through employment records and tax filings, but finally locating him in a small town in Montana where he worked as a handyman for a property management company. 2 FBI agents knocked on his door on March 27, 2025. When Logan opened it, they saw a man hollowed out by time and secrets, his face lined and weathered, his eyes carrying the weight of decades. They told him about the discovery, about his brother's remains, about the reopened investigation. Logan listened without expression, nodded once and said, "I always knew." They asked him what he meant. He invited them inside. The story Logan Pierce told the FBI agents that afternoon would change everything. He had been lying, he said, for 33 years, not about the important things, not about what happened to Ethan, but about what he remembered. The truth was, he remembered everything, and every detail, every sound, every second of that night. He had been awake when Ethan disappeared. It was just past midnight when Logan, then Lucas, heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful, deliberate. He assumed it was his mother going to the bathroom, or his father getting a glass of water. He kept his eyes closed, trying to drift back to sleep. Then he heard the bedroom door open. Slowly, almost silently, the hinges barely creaking. He opened his eyes and saw a figure standing in the doorway, backlit by the dim nightlight in the hallway. Not his mother. Not his mother. Not his father. Someone taller, someone wearing dark clothing. Logan's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to scream, but fear locked his throat shut. The figure moved into the room, crossing to the bunk beds with eerie silence. Logan squeezed his eyes shut again, pretending to sleep, praying whoever it was would leave. He heard the ladder creak as the figure climbed to the top bunk, and heard the rustle of sheets, heard a soft sound, almost like a sigh. Then footsteps moving away, the door closing, silence. Logan lay frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When he finally found the courage to move, he climbed down from his bunk and looked up at Ethan's bed. His brother was gone. The blanket was pulled back, the pillow still indented from where his head had been. Panic flooded through Logan. He wanted to run, to scream for his parents, to do something. But terror held him paralyzed. What if the figure came back? What if whoever took Ethan came for him next? So Logan climbed back into his bunk, pulled the covers over his head, and waited for morning. He told himself it was a nightmare, that Ethan would be there when the sun came up, that everything would be okay. When his mother found him the next morning, he could not tell her the truth. He could not admit that he had been awake, that he had seen someone take his brother, that he had done nothing to stop it. The shame and guilt were too overwhelming. So he lied. He said he had slept through the whole thing, that he woke up and Ethan was already gone, and he kept lying for 33 years. The FBI agents listened to this confession with careful attention, taking notes, recording every word. But they asked the obvious question, who was the figure? Did Logan recognize them? Logan shook his head. The hallway light had been behind the person, casting them in silhouette. He could not see a face, could not make out features. Just a shape, tall and thin, moving with purpose. But there was something else, he said. Something he had buried so deep in his memory that he had almost convinced himself it was not real. The smell. The smell. When the figure had been in the room, Logan had smelled something distinct. Paint thinner or turpentine, mixed with cigarette smoke. A sharp, chemical odor that burned his nostrils. The agents pressed him for more details. Had his father smoked? Had anyone in the neighborhood been doing construction or painting work around that time? Logan thought carefully. His father did not smoke. His mother did not allow smoking in the house. But there was someone. A neighbor. A man who lived 2 doors down, who worked nights at a factory and always seemed to be tinkering in his garage when Logan walked home from school. Thomas Brennan. Bird. Munn. Thomas Brennan had lived at 247 Maple Drive from 1988 until his death in 2018. He was a machinist at a manufacturing plant 20 miles outside Millbrook, working 3rd shift, arriving home around dawn most mornings. He was 45 years old in 1992, unmarried, living alone in a house he had inherited from his parents. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, unremarkable. He kept to himself, maintained his property, caused no trouble. Police had interviewed him during the original investigation, as they had interviewed everyone on the street. Brennan told investigators he had been at work the night Ethan disappeared, that he had not seen or heard anything unusual. His alibi checked out. Factory time cards confirmed he had clocked in at 11 p.m. on August 14th and clocked out at 7 a.m. on August 15th. He was cleared of suspicion. But alibis can be fabricated. Time cards can be falsified. And in 1992, forensic technology was limited. There was no DNA testing of the bedroom, no careful analysis of fibers or trace evidence. Police were looking for signs of forced entry, obvious clues, clear suspects. They were not looking for a neighbor with a perfect alibi and no apparent motive. FBI agents obtained a warrant to search Brennan's property, though he had been dead for 7 years and the house had been sold twice since then. And the current owners, a young couple with 2 small children, had no idea about the history. They cooperated fully, allowing investigators to search the garage, the basement, every corner of the property. In the garage, beneath layers of dust and old paint cans, investigators found a locked metal cabinet. They forced it open and discovered a collection of items that turned their blood cold. Photographs, dozens of them. Polaroids mostly faded and yellowed with age. Children playing in yards. Children riding bicycles. Children walking home from school. All taken from a distance, telephoto angles, surveillance shots. And among those photographs, several images of Ethan Hartley. Ethan laughing with friends outside the elementary school. Ethan throwing a baseball in his backyard. Ethan sitting on the front porch reading a comic book. The photos were dated, written in neat handwriting on the back. June 1992, July 1992, August 1992. There were other items in the cabinet. A notebook filled with detailed observations, dates and times and locations. Drawings, crude but disturbing, depicting scenarios that made seasoned investigators feel physically ill. And at the bottom of the cabinet, wrapped in an oily rag, a claw hammer with dark stains on the head. Forensic analysis would later confirm that the stains were human blood and that the DNA matched Ethan Hartley. Thomas Brennan had not been at work the night Ethan disappeared. He had falsified his time card, a simple matter for someone who understood the factory's punch clock system. He had waited until the Hartley house was dark and silent, had picked the lock on the back door, a skill he possessed from his machinist training, and had crept upstairs to the boy's bedroom. He had climbed the ladder to the top bunk, had placed a hand over Ethan's mouth before the boy could scream, and had carried him down the stairs and out through the back door. Lucas, frozen with terror in the bottom bunk, had witnessed it all. Brennan had taken Ethan to a location investigators would spend weeks trying to pinpoint, had killed him with the hammer, and had buried him in the pre-constructed tomb in the woods. A tomb he had built weeks earlier, anticipating this moment, planning every detail. Why? What had driven a seemingly ordinary man to commit such a monstrous act? The notebook provided some answers, though they were answers that offered no comfort. But Brennan had written extensively about his thoughts, his urges, his fantasies. He described Ethan as special, as chosen, as someone who needed to be preserved. The writings revealed a deeply disturbed mind, a man who had been stalking children for years, who had finally acted on his darkest impulses. There was no indication that Brennan had killed anyone else, though investigators would spend months searching for other victims. The photographs in his garage depicted dozens of children, but all of them were eventually identified and confirmed alive. Ethan appeared to be his only victim, though the knowledge provided little solace. Thomas Brennan had died of a heart attack in 2018, alone in his home, undiscovered for 3 days until a postal worker noticed mail piling up. He had taken his secrets to the grave, never suspected, never caught, living 7 houses down from the family he had destroyed. The revelation shattered what remained of the Hartley family. Patricia Hartley released a statement through her attorney, saying she was grateful for the truth but devastated by the years of not knowing. She did not blame Logan for his silence. She understood, she said, that he had been a child, paralyzed by fear, traumatized by what he had witnessed. She only wished she could have protected both her sons. David Hartley did not release a statement. He died 2 weeks after the news broke, found in his apartment by a neighbor. The medical examiner ruled it a heart attack, though everyone who knew the case understood it was something else. A broken heart. A life that had been waiting 33 years to end. Logan Pierce attended his father's funeral, but did not speak to anyone. He stood at the gravesite, watching the casket lower into the ground, and then walked away without looking back. The town of Millbrook struggled to process the revelation. Thomas Brennan had been one of them, a neighbor, someone they had seen at the grocery store and the gas station. How many times had they waved to him? How many times had they made small talk while he concealed such darkness? The house at 247 Maple Drive went up for sale immediately. No one made an offer. But the forest where Ethan's body had been found became a memorial site, though an unofficial one. People left flowers and stuffed animals, notes and candles, and the real estate development was cancelled. No one wanted to build homes on ground that held such tragedy. But even with the truth revealed, even with the monster identified and the mystery solved, questions lingered. How many times had Brennan entered the Hartley house before that night? Had he been inside while the family slept, watching, waiting? Had he targeted other children in other towns before settling in Millbrook? Were there other victims, buried in other woods, still waiting to be found? The FBI continues to investigate, sifting through Brennan's belongings, analyzing his travels, searching for answers. But Thomas Brennan is beyond justice now, beyond punishment, beyond the reach of anyone who might demand accountability. All that remains is the memory of a boy who never got to grow up, a family destroyed by one night of horror, and a town that will never feel quite as safe again. Ethan Hartley was 11 years old when he died. He liked baseball and comic books. He wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up. He had a smile that lit up rooms and a laugh that made everyone around him feel lighter. He deserved better than the fate that found him. They all did. The FBI established a task force in April 2025, 3 weeks after the discovery of Ethan Hartley's remains. Special Agent Nicole Ferraro, a veteran investigator with the Bureau's Violent Crimes Against Children Unit, led the team. She had worked cold cases before, had seen the worst humanity had to offer, but something about the Brennan investigation unsettled her in ways she could not quite articulate. It was not just the brutality of the crime, though that was horrific enough. It was the methodical nature of it, the planning, the careful construction of that concrete tomb weeks or months before Ethan disappeared. Thomas Brennan had not acted on impulse. He had orchestrated every detail, anticipated every contingency, executed a plan with the precision of someone who had done this before. But had he? Ferraro assembled a team of analysts and forensic specialists to examine every aspect of Brennan's life. They obtained warrants for his financial records going back to 1975, when he first moved to Millbrook. They tracked his employment history, his travel patterns, his known associates. They interviewed former co-workers, distant relatives, anyone who might provide insight into the man behind the monster. What they discovered was a ghost. Thomas Brennan had lived in Millbrook for 30 years, but he had left almost no mark on the world. No close friends, no romantic relationships, no memberships in clubs or organizations. He went to work, came home, and disappeared into his house. Neighbors described him as pleasant but distant, the kind of person you might exchange pleasantries with but never really know. His financial records showed a modest income from his machinist job, regular payments on his mortgage until it was paid off in 2001, and routine purchases of groceries, then utilities and basic necessities. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. But there were gaps. In 1987, Brennan had withdrawn $3,000 in cash from his savings account, a significant sum for someone living on a factory worker's salary. No record existed of what he spent it on. In 1990, he had taken a 2-week vacation, the only vacation his employer could remember him taking in 20 years. He told his supervisor he was visiting family in Vermont. Investigators contacted Vermont State Police, searched for hotel records, rental car receipts, anything that might confirm his presence there. They found nothing. Then there was 1992, the year Ethan died. Brennan's bank statements showed several large cash withdrawals in the months leading up to August. $400 in May, $600 in June, $800 in July. All withdrawn from ATMs in different towns, none of them Millbrook. Agent Ferraro studied the ATM locations on a map. They formed a rough circle around the county, each one near a residential area, near schools and parks and places where children played. She felt her stomach turn as the pattern emerged. Brennan had been hunting. The task force expanded its investigation beyond Millbrook. They contacted police departments in every town where Brennan had withdrawn cash, requesting files on missing children cases from the late 1980s and early 1990s. The responses came slowly, file boxes shipped from small-town police stations, manila folders yellowed with age, Polaroids of smiling children who had vanished without explanation. 3 cases stood out. In May 1987, 7-year-old Jennifer Moss disappeared from her backyard in Harrisville, Pennsylvania, 40 miles from Millbrook. She had been playing on a swing set while her mother prepared dinner inside. When her mother called her in 15 minutes later, Jennifer was gone. No witnesses, no leads. The case went cold within months. In October 1989, 9-year-old Daniel Kowalski vanished while riding his bicycle home from a friend's house in Greenfield, Pennsylvania, 35 miles from Millbrook. His bicycle was found abandoned on a residential street 2 blocks from his destination. Police searched for weeks, dragged ponds, combed through woods. Nothing. Nothing. In June 1991, 8-year-old Rebecca Torres disappeared from a community pool in Riverside, Pennsylvania, 28 miles from Millbrook. Her mother had been watching her swim, then turned away for just a moment to retrieve a towel from their bag. When she looked back, Rebecca was gone. Security footage showed a dark sedan leaving the parking lot around the estimated time of disappearance, but the license plate was obscured and the driver unidentifiable. 3 children. 3 unsolved disappearances, 3 towns within a 50-mile radius of Millbrook. And in each case, Thomas Brennan had made ATM withdrawals in those towns within weeks of the disappearances. Circumstantial evidence, yes. Not proof, but too coincidental to ignore. Agent Ferraro obtained cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar equipment. If Brennan had killed these children, if he had buried them as he buried Ethan, the bodies might still be recoverable. The question was where to look. She returned to Brennan's property, to the garage where they had found the photographs and the hammer. The team had already searched every inch of the house and yard, but Ferraro wanted to look again with fresh eyes. She stood in the garage, studying the walls, the floor, the ceiling, searching for anything they might have missed. Her gaze fell on a workbench along the back wall. It was heavy, bolted to the floor, covered with tools and paint cans and decades of accumulated debris. But when she looked closer, she noticed something odd. The concrete floor beneath the workbench was cleaner than the surrounding area, as though it had been poured more recently. She called in the forensic team. They moved the workbench carefully, documenting its position, photographing every detail. Beneath it, they found exactly what Ferraro had suspected. The patch of newer concrete, roughly 4 feet by 4 feet, smooth and level. They broke through it with jackhammers. Beneath the concrete, 6 feet down, they found another metal box. Inside were the skeletal remains of a child, wrapped in degraded plastic, along with scraps of clothing and a small silver bracelet engraved with a name, Jennifer Moss. Moss. The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across Pennsylvania. If Brennan had buried Jennifer Moss beneath his garage, where were the others? How many more victims were there? Ferraro's team expanded the search to the woods where Ethan had been found. They brought in additional cadaver dogs, sectioned off grid patterns, began the painstaking process of searching acre by acre. The work was slow, methodical, exhausting. But on the 4th day, the dogs alerted in 2 separate locations. 4 concrete slabs, hidden beneath years of accumulated leaves and undergrowth. More metal boxes. More children. Daniel Kowalski. Rebecca Torres. All of them killed the same way. Blunt force trauma to the skull. All of them carefully buried, hidden in graves that might have remained undiscovered forever if not for the construction project that unearthed Ethan. 4 children. 4 families torn apart by loss. 4 unsolved cases that could finally be closed, though closure brought cold comfort. The media descended on Millbrook like locusts. News vans lined the streets, reporters doing live shots in front of Brennan's former house, helicopters circling overhead to capture aerial footage of the search sites. The story dominated national headlines for weeks. How had one man killed 4 children over the course of 5 years without anyone suspecting? How had he evaded detection, continued working at the factory, lived among his neighbors as though nothing was wrong? Former co-workers gave interviews, all expressing shock and disbelief. Brennan had been quiet, they said, but not creepy. He did his job, kept to himself, never caused problems. There had been no red flags, no warning signs, nothing that might have suggested he was capable of such evil. But Agent Ferraro was not satisfied. 4 victims across 5 years suggested a pattern, a compulsion that did not simply start in 1987 and end in 1992. Serial offenders did not stop on their own. They continued until they were caught, until they died, or until circumstances prevented them from acting on their urges. Brennan had died in 2018, and that meant 26 years between his last known victim and his death. Had he really stopped? Or had he simply become more careful, buried bodies in places investigators had not yet found? Ferraro obtained Brennan's travel records from his employer. Factory workers were required to submit time-off requests in writing, and the company had maintained archives going back decades. She pored through the records, looking for patterns, for gaps in his attendance that might correspond with other disappearances. What she found chilled her to the bone. In 1994, Brennan had taken 3 days off, claiming illness. During those same 3 days, a 6-year-old boy named Matthew Wu had disappeared from a park in Allentown, Pennsylvania, 70 miles from Millbrook. The case remained unsolved. In 1998, he had taken a week off, claiming he needed to handle his late mother's estate, though his mother had actually died in 1986. During that week, 2 children disappeared from separate locations in western Pennsylvania. 9-year-old Kelly Benson vanished while walking to school in Meadville. A 10-year-old Christopher Lang disappeared from a shopping mall parking lot in Erie. Both cases unsolved. In 2003, he had taken 4 days off for what he described as a fishing trip. During those days, 7-year-old Amanda Price had vanished from her grandmother's farm in rural Pennsylvania. No witnesses. None. No leads. Case cold. 4 more possible victims. 8 total. Maybe more. Muncie, Tutruchin. Ferraro's team created a database of every missing child case in Pennsylvania from 1980 to 2015, cross-referencing them with Brennan's known movements, his cash withdrawals, his time off from work. Patterns emerged like constellations in a dark sky, connections that seemed too numerous to be coincidental. But the 11 cases fit the profile. 11 children who had disappeared under circumstances similar to Ethan Hartley and the others. 11 families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their sons and daughters. And the task force mobilized a massive search effort, coordinating with local police departments across the state. They focused on areas Brennan had visited, places he had made ATM withdrawals or purchased gas. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, forensic anthropologists. The searches would continue for months, stretching into summer and fall of 2025. And they would find 3 more bodies. Matthew Wu, buried in a wooded area behind an abandoned factory in Allentown. Kelly Benson, hidden beneath a concrete slab in a park maintenance shed in Meadville. Christopher Lang, interred in a shallow grave on state game lands near Erie. 7 confirmed victims, possibly more still undiscovered. Each discovery brought anguished closure to families who had waited decades for answers. They held funerals for children who had been missing longer than they had been alive. They tried to find peace in knowing the truth, even though the truth was almost unbearable. But 3 cases remained unsolved. Amanda Price and 2 others, children who fit Brennan's pattern, but whose remains had not been found. The searches continued, but hope faded with each passing week. Logan Pierce watched the news coverage from his apartment in Montana, 800 miles from the nightmare unfolding in Pennsylvania. He saw the aerial shots of search teams combing through forests, saw the press conferences where Agent Ferraro announced each new discovery, and saw the photographs of children who looked so much like Ethan, frozen forever at the age they died. He thought about calling his mother, but could not bring himself to pick up the phone. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry? That he wished he had done something different that night in 1992? The words felt hollow, inadequate. Instead, he sat alone in his apartment and let the weight of it crush him. 7 dead children. 7 families destroyed. And it had started just 2 doors down from his childhood home, carried out by a man he had seen dozens of times, a neighbor who waved when Logan rode his bike past his house. The guilt Logan had carried for 33 years multiplied exponentially. If he had screamed that night, if he had run to his parents' room, if he had done anything besides freeze in terror, would Ethan still be alive? Would the other children have been spared? Logically, he knew the answer was probably no. Brennan had been planning Ethan's abduction for months. If Logan had interfered, Brennan might have killed both brothers, or fled and simply chosen different victims later. But logic provided no comfort against the crushing weight of survivors' guilt. On May 3, 2025, Logan received a phone call from Agent Ferraro. She wanted to meet with him, she said, to discuss some aspects of the case. She would fly to Montana if necessary. It was important. Logan agreed, though he could not imagine what more he could tell her. He had already provided his statement, had answered every question multiple times. What else could there be? Ferraro arrived 2 days later. They met at a diner on the edge of town, neutral territory, away from prying eyes and curious locals. She slid a manila folder across the table before she even ordered coffee. Inside were photographs. Crime scene photos from Brennan's garage, images of the metal cabinet where they had found the Polaroids and the hammer. But these were different from the ones Logan had already seen in news reports. These showed the back wall of the cabinet, where someone had carved something into the metal with a sharp tool. Numbers, dates, initials were JM51487, DK10789, RT62291, A81592, Jennifer Moss, Daniel Kowalski, Rebecca Torres, Ethan Hartley. Logan felt his vision swim. Brennan had kept a record, a trophy list carved into the cabinet where he stored his mementos. But the list did not end with Ethan. W31294, KB4698, CL41098, AP919903, 7 confirmed victims. But the list continued. 4 more sets of initials and dates, stretching from 2007 to 2015. Ferraro watched Logan's face carefully as he processed what he was seeing. She said, "We have not been able to match these last 4 to any missing persons cases in Pennsylvania, but we are expanding the search to surrounding states. If you think of anything at all from your childhood that might help us identify these victims or locate their remains, please tell me." Logan stared at the photographs, his hands trembling. 11 victims carved into metal, hidden in a cabinet in a garage where Brennan had worked on his car and organized his tools and planned his murders. He looked up at Ferraro and said he used to travel for work. "I remember my dad mentioning it once, that Brennan sometimes took contract jobs at other factories when they needed extra machinists. I do not know where, but maybe that is how he found victims outside Pennsylvania." Ferraro nodded slowly. She had suspected something similar. That if Brennan had traveled for work, it would explain gaps in the timeline, would explain why some of the later victims had not been found in Pennsylvania. She thanked Logan and left him with her card, told him to call if he remembered anything else. Then she was gone, back on a plane to Pennsylvania, back to the investigation that seemed to grow darker with each new discovery. Logan sat in the diner for another hour, staring at nothing, trying to process the magnitude of what Brennan had done. 11 children, 11 families, 11 lives stolen and hidden away like secrets. Somewhere, possibly in states they had not even begun to search, 4 more bodies were waiting to be found. By August 2025, the FBI had identified 2 of the remaining 4 victims. Brennan had indeed traveled for contract work, taking temporary assignments at factories in Ohio, West Virginia, and New York between 2003 and 2015. Cross-referencing his travel dates with missing persons cases in those states yielded results. In 2007, 8-year-old Sophie Miller had disappeared from a playground in Youngstown, Ohio, while her father was distracted by a phone call. Brennan had been working at a factory in Youngstown during the week she vanished. In 2012, 10-year-old Justin Reeves had disappeared while walking his dog near his home in Morgantown, West Virginia. The dog was found wandering the neighborhood hours later, its leash cut. Brennan had been in Morgantown on a 3-week contract job. Search teams mobilized in both states, using the same methodologies that had proven successful in Pennsylvania. They looked for wooded areas near Brennan's known locations, places isolated enough to bury a body without being observed. They brought cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, dug through undergrowth and decades of accumulated forest debris. In September, they found Sophie Miller buried in a state park outside Youngstown. In October, they found Justin Reeves on abandoned industrial land near Morgantown. 9 confirmed victims. 2 still unidentified, their initials and death dates carved into metal, but their names unknown. The families of Sophie and Justin received the news with the same mixture of relief and devastation that had become grimly familiar. Relief that the uncertainty was over, that they could finally lay their children to rest properly. Devastation that the worst possible outcome had been confirmed, that the hope they had clung to for years was extinguished forever. Patricia Hartley watched these developments from her apartment in Ohio, following every news report, reading every article. She thought about Sophie Miller, who had disappeared just 70 miles from where she now lived. She thought about how close Brennan had been, how he had continued killing for decades after murdering her son. She thought about the 2 remaining victims, the ones whose names nobody knew. 2 families somewhere still waiting, still wondering, still hoping against hope that their children might somehow still be alive. Patricia knew that hope was a lie. She had clung to it for 33 years, and it had sustained her through the darkest times, but it had also prevented her from accepting reality. Now she understood that hope could be as cruel as any truth. She called Logan for the first time since Ethan's remains had been discovered. They talked for 3 hours, crying together over the phone, sharing memories of Ethan that had grown hazy with time, trying to find some meaning in the senseless tragedy that had shaped both their lives. Patricia told Logan she did not blame him, but she repeated it until he stopped arguing, until he began to believe her. He had been a child, she said. He had done nothing wrong. The guilt belonged to Brennan and Brennan alone. But Logan could not quite let go of it. But he had lived with that guilt for so long it had become part of his identity, woven into the fabric of who he was. Releasing it felt impossible. They agreed to stay in contact, to rebuild some version of the relationship Brennan had stolen from them. It would not be easy. Too many years had passed, too much damage had been done. But they could try. The investigation continued into 2026. Agent Ferraro's task force remained active, pursuing leads, searching for the final 2 victims. They obtained Brennan's cell phone records from his service provider, though he had not owned a cell phone until 2008, years after most of his crimes. They searched his email accounts, found mostly spam and work-related correspondence, nothing useful. They interviewed dozens of people who had known him over the years, looking for any detail that might provide a breakthrough. A former co-worker remembered Brennan mentioning a camping trip to upstate New York in 2013. Another recalled him talking about visiting Niagara Falls in 2015. Small details, fragments of information that might lead nowhere or might be crucial. Search teams deployed to both locations, focusing on state parks and isolated areas where someone could bury a body unnoticed. The work was exhausting, often futile, but they pressed on. 2 children were still missing. 2 families still deserved answers. In March 2026, they found remains in a wooded area outside Rochester, New York. DNA testing would take weeks, but forensic anthropologists estimated the victim to be a child between 8 and 10 years old, deceased for approximately 13 years. The timeline matched one of the carved dates in Brennan's cabinet. 1 more victim found. 1 still missing. As of today, that final child has not been identified. The initials LG and the date 8715 are carved into the metal cabinet wall, a cryptic epitaph for someone whose name investigators may never learn. The FBI maintains an active investigation, following leads as they emerge, refusing to give up. But Thomas Brennan took some secrets to his grave. And this may be one of them. The town of Millbrook will never be the same. The house at 247 Maple Drive was demolished in late 2025, torn down to the foundation and carted away. The lot remains empty, overgrown with weeds, marked only by a small memorial plaque placed by the town council. It lists the names of Ethan Hartley and the other victims, a reminder of lives cut short and evil that hid in plain sight. The Hartley house on Maple Drive still stands, though it has been empty since 2024. No one wants to live there now, not after everything that happened. Children avoid walking past it. Adults cross the street rather than pass the front gate. It has become a monument to tragedy, a physical embodiment of how quickly safety can shatter. Logan Pierce still lives in Montana. He changed jobs, moved to a different town, tried once again to outrun his past. He speaks with his mother every Sunday now, a ritual they have maintained for over a year. They talk about ordinary things, mostly weather and work and books they are reading. Sometimes they talk about Ethan. Those conversations are harder but necessary. Patricia Hartley remains in Ohio. She volunteers at a support group for families of missing children, offering comfort to people who understand her pain in ways others cannot. She says it helps, giving meaning to her suffering, turning tragedy into something that might benefit others. But late at night, when the apartment is quiet and memories rise unbidden, she still thinks about Ethan, still wonders what kind of man he would have become, What life he would have lived if Thomas Brennan had never moved to Maple Drive. The FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children unit continues to investigate cold cases across the country, looking for patterns that might connect to Brennan, for additional victims that might still be undiscovered. Agent Ferraro keeps the case files on her desk, refuses to close them until every question is answered, every child is found. She knows it may never happen, but she refuses to stop trying. In the end, what remains is questions. How does a monster live among us undetected for decades? How many opportunities were there to stop him before he killed again? What small details were overlooked? What red flags were missed? The truth is uncomfortable. Brennan was not some shadowy figure lurking in dark alleys. He was a neighbor, a co-worker, someone you might nod to at the grocery store. He looked ordinary because he was ordinary, except for the darkness he carried inside. There were no warning signs because he had learned to hide them. He was meticulous, patient, careful. He planned his crimes months in advance, selected victims who fit specific criteria, buried them in places that might never be discovered. He understood how investigations worked, what evidence to avoid leaving, how to construct alibis that would withstand scrutiny. He was intelligent, methodical, and utterly without conscience. And he was lucky that technology in the 1980s and 90s was limited, that DNA testing was not standard procedure, that security cameras were rare and forensic techniques were less sophisticated. Lucky that he lived in small towns where people trusted their neighbors, where police departments were understaffed and overwhelmed, where missing children cases often went cold quickly. Lucky, most of all, that no one suspected him, that he could kill a child, bury the body, and return to work the next day without anyone noticing anything amiss. But luck only lasts so long. Eventually, construction workers broke ground in the wrong place. Eventually, concrete cracked and secrets were exposed. Eventually, the truth emerged, though it came 3 decades too late for the victims and their families. Thomas Brennan is beyond justice now, beyond punishment, beyond the reach of anyone who might demand he explain himself. He will never face trial, never hear the testimony of parents whose lives he destroyed, never answer for what he did. All that remains is the memory of 11 children, their names carved into a memorial plaque in a town that will never forget. All that remains is the grief of families who waited decades for closure and found only confirmation of their worst fears. All that remains is the knowledge that evil does not always announce itself, that monsters do not always wear recognizable faces. Sometimes they live 2 doors down, but sometimes they smile and wave when you pass them on the street. Sometimes they hide in plain sight until it is too late. The case of Thomas Brennan and his victims stands as a reminder of how fragile safety truly is, how quickly lives can be shattered, how long secrets can remain buried. It serves as a warning to remain vigilant, to pay attention to the world around us, to question the ordinary when something feels wrong. But most of all, it stands as a testament to the children who died. They were more than victims, more than case numbers in a police file. They were sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, friends and classmates. They had dreams and fears and favorite foods and songs they loved to sing. They deserved to grow up. They deserve to live full lives, to fall in love and have families and experience all the joys and sorrows that make up a human existence. Thomas Brennan stole that from them, and nothing, no amount of investigation or discovery or justice, can ever give it back.
One final detail haunts Agent Ferraro, keeps her awake on nights when the case file sits open on her kitchen table and coffee grows cold in her cup. The concrete slabs, the metal boxes. The careful burial sites constructed weeks or months before each abduction. Brennan had built those graves alone, working in secret, transporting materials without being observed. It would have taken time, effort, planning. It would have required tools, vehicles, knowledge of remote locations where he could work undisturbed.
But Thomas Brennan had worked full-time at the factory, had lived under the watchful eyes of neighbors, had been interviewed by police and cleared of suspicion. How had he managed it all without anyone noticing? The answer, Ferraro suspects, is that he did not manage it alone. But every lead she has pursued in that direction has dead-ended. Brennan had no close friends, no known accomplices, no evidence of collaboration with anyone else. Indeed, his financial records show no payments to contractors or laborers. His phone records, limited as they are, reveal no suspicious contacts. But if he had help, that person covered their tracks perfectly. Or perhaps Brennan truly did work alone, driven by compulsion so powerful that he found ways to accomplish the impossible. Perhaps his meticulous nature and years of patient planning allowed him to construct those hidden graves one shovelful at a time, that working in the dead of night when no one was watching. Perhaps. But Ferraro cannot shake the feeling that something is missing, some piece of the puzzle that would make the whole picture finally make sense. She continues to investigate, continues to search. Because until that final victim is found, until every question is answered, the case remains open. And the darkness that consumed Thomas Brennan, that allowed him to kill 11 children and hide their bodies for decades, remains a mystery that haunts everyone who has touched this case. The files remain on Agent Ferraro's desk. The searches continue in forests across 3 states. And somewhere, possibly buried beneath concrete and earth, a child named LG waits to be found, to be given a name, to be returned to a family that may have long since given up hope.
The investigation continues. The questions remain unanswered. And the town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania will carry the weight of these tragedies for generations to come. Some wounds never heal. Some secrets, even when exposed, leave scars that time cannot erase.